Hey, welcome back to the podcast. James Finlen is here, and he is the founder and the CEO of School Apps Today, which you can find at thegapapp.com. And there is an epidemic of loneliness and isolation out there that is happening with kids these days in school. So James has an important message for you parents to make sure that your kid is on the right track, your kid is happy and fulfilled and successful, and all those other things. So James, glad to be speaking to you today.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. And so, as far as this problem that's out there and this message that you have, how are you qualified to speak to this? Like, what are you all about? Where are you coming from?
I was a teacher and a coach for 20 years, and I think coaching it really provided me a lot of insight into how to not only develop and motivate individuals, but also how to bring them together in a team environment where they have to rely on each other for their success. I think that's a very challenging dynamic. And I think, basketball to me might be the ultimate team sport because you're really trying to create harmony amongst, five different members on the floor. So, and of course, teaching to me it was a lot like coaching, especially teaching special ed. I was trying to work with students on their individual education plan and set goals and try to encourage them toward those goals and outcomes while also providing constructive criticism. So I think that 20 years, especially coaching, because it is very challenging, and that would probably uniquely qualify me, I'd say, Robert.
Wonderful. And what I get from speaking with you so far is that there are challenges in many of these situations, but challenges are good and we can rise to the occasion. And there are many of these sort of ingredients to success. You need to be motivated. You need to accomplish these goals. You need to be course corrected. And when you think about sports, you think about basketball, like for me, for some reason, what comes to mind is Michael Jordan as a kid. And then everyone talks about Michael Jordan just like practicing for hours on ends by himself, just like shooting the hoops one after another. But then what maybe isn't discussed is all the other aspects of that, right? Like Michael Jordan, the team he played on had a coach and he interacted with his other players. And so there's like a daily set of problems to be dealt with all the times. And it's easy to think like, okay, I'm going to school, I've got my teacher, and that's it. But there's all these other relationships at play and all these other kind of problems that are coming in front of us. So what kind of problems do parents today deal with, or what do they fear about the future?
I love that you brought up Michael Jordan, and I was in fact watching The Last Dance, the documentary on the Bulls this morning, and of course, I watched Michael Jordan growing up, but I love him as an example because above all things, he was always setting the example. He had a high standard for his teammates, but he always practiced, especially to a high standard. And some of his teammates would say, you just knew as hard as he worked, if you didn't bring it every day, you didn't feel like you should be there. So I think the modeling, the setting the example, that's why I love Jordan's example. And then another thing people don't see at first is all the failure he had to go through to become that six-time champion. I think it was 7 or 8 years in the NBA trying to get through the Detroit Pistons and getting beat up every time he went into the paint and getting knocked to the floor. That pain and forced him to get in the weight room. It forced him to work harder, to motivate his teammates to work harder. And so that pain of failure helped him rise to the occasion. And I think it's important for parents and students to realize that and embrace failure. We see a lot of parents trying to protect kids from failure because they don't want them to be hurt. But this is the most fundamental life lesson. we're all going to fail at some point, and we want to understand how to dig deep and how to overcome that. We don't want these kids turning to drugs and alcohol as a way to just ease the pain. So I think it's important to let kids fail. Schools have to let kids fail, and that's just not happening. But I think it all starts at home, especially with the modeling and setting an example. The system I've developed really focuses on that. In fact, parents who want to enter their email there at thegapapp.com will first have to engage in some activities and some different modules that I provide so that they are also working toward better outcomes, so that they can set that example and set the tone for the young person, their child, that they're going to eventually want to bring along. So I think modeling is so important. We have to let these kids fail. And I'd say those are the big two right there to start with.
Wonderful. So we need to set a good example, and we need to embrace failure. And you always hear the stereotypes and the jokes about how the kids these days, that they're kind of like pampered too much, or that there's the participation trophies, but I'm never really sure like how much of that is a joke or how much of that is true. So you, as an educator, seeing how schools are today versus how they are 20 years ago, is there some truth to that, to like the participation trophy joke, or is that just a lot of fluff?
No, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Everybody doesn't get a trophy in life, but we are instilling that type of mindset. And the real tragedy there is when these young people get to and I know this because it wasn't that different back in the 90s when I was in high school, or middle school. They were still starting this trend of everybody gets a trophy. So, when you come to understand the world that way, that success is kind of easy, it essentially handicaps you, because you're not prepared for the hard work and the grinding that it takes, the many small consistent actions and habits that you have to develop to get where you want to be. So yeah, it's absolutely true. We're doing that, and we have to make some changes. And again, I think it starts at home, and then when parents are embracing that challenge, I think the next step is to take it to schools and try to say, hey, listen, if my child does not meet the standard to pass this class, they don't need to pass the class. Repeating one summer or one semester of a class to feel that pain it could be the key to that child learning the lesson that helps them when they have a family and maybe they lose their job. And, instead of sitting back and waiting for something to happen, they then go out and they mow lawns or they shovel snow or do whatever it takes to put food on the table. So it's just that perseverance and that ability to grind and overcome that we really need to communicate and instill.
So you're tapping into a few interesting ideas here, right? Because it's easy just to give instructions, but you're explaining like why the instructions are important, right? You're saying set a good example, and we've all heard that, but why? Well, because your kids are picking up on everything that you're doing, and you're saying it's important to maybe toughen up the kids and to have them really struggle and work towards something. And that sounds good, but you say why? Well, because later on in life, when they come across some even bigger problems, even bigger disasters, like losing a job or some kind of catastrophic life failure, like a divorce or something like that, then they will have these past life experiences to draw from, and they'll have these techniques, and it won't be as scary later in life. So you're just basically like setting them up for success. And you also mentioned here how it's a slippery slope. It's easy for kids to fall back onto things like drugs and all these other bad habits. And so, like you're saying that there may be some solutions here, right? You're mentioning about setting a good example and communicating with our kids. And like, what are your thoughts on, let's say, a parent is thinking about setting or getting their kid involved in sports or some kind of extracurricular activities, but they're not really sure like where to start. Like, what would you tell a parent who maybe wants to get ahead of this problem by maybe filling up the schedule a little bit?
Well, I love sports because, and if it's rec sports or school sports, it gives you an opportunity to learn these lessons in an authentic way, in a real life situation. So rather than just hearing them, you're actually experiencing failure and having to overcome failure. So I love that. And even if it's not competitive sports, I think physical exercise, whether it's just walking for 20 minutes or 30 minutes on a consistent basis, it just breathes life into everything else. I think overall wellness really starts there. And then as your physical health improves, your opportunity to improve your mental and emotional and social health improves. It just makes you feel better. And when you feel better and you have more energy, you can focus on those other areas that need attention. Character development. I love Martin Luther King's quote that intelligence plus character is the goal of true education. So, looking for ways to develop character, and that's the thing, Robert, that in those few seconds between stimulus and response, those decisions that we make on a daily basis that influence the direction of our lives, character is the set of that sail. No matter which way the wind blows, your character helps you make those decisions that constantly guide you in the right direction. You know, without trust, without being trustworthy, if you're not honest, these things never result in anything good. You might not see it tomorrow, but eventually you will. So character development, and anybody can pinpoint top 5 character traits or 5 of the top 10. So it really starts with setting that example and communication, with recognizing the good, recognizing the good things related to character that you see on a day-to-day basis, capitalize on those moments and create that constant communication. And when you give some encouragement or you recognize something good, that also gives you the opportunity to weave in some constructive criticism. I used to always, when I bring a player out of the basketball game, I'd always try to recognize something good he did at first. So I'd say, Johnny, great job blocking out on the boards there, but I need you diving on the floor for those loose balls. So as soon as he heard something good, now he's tuned in. And then, of course, he's more receptive to that constructive criticism at that point. So I'd say starting there. And I love movies. Remember the Titans, for example. You can watch these movies, Coach Carter, and even if it's not a sports movie, you can find character lessons in all of these things. So, and we know how much technology is a part of our everyday lives. We could leverage movies to teach character. So there's a lot of opportunities there if we're looking for them, and we're focused on character development.
That's a nice list of some amazing ideas. And you mentioned movies, you're making me think like 20 years ago, maybe even longer, in a class, they had us watch Rudy. And I don't know much about football, but that movie blew me away. And every few years I think about that again and I think like, man, if that was on TV, I'd watch the heck out of that if it was on. And so there's kind of a library, a swipe file of some of these just experiences you can live through vicariously and kind of pick up some of these ideas and just like see how we should act and see how we should behave and maybe inspire us to achieve more. And so just for me to digest some of these things that you're mentioning here, you're saying that it's a good idea to look into some kind of sports, and it doesn't have to be competitive sports. It can just be like some kind of a physical activity. And you think about some of these role models. You think about like Richard Simmons or Jack LaLanne or Arnold Schwarzenegger. They're all about this, right? They're all about the being healthy and moving and how it all relates to your mind. And then you're saying that developing our character and our emotional intelligence is really important. That way we're honest and we do the right thing. And it makes you think back to like when I was a kid, and maybe you think about this too, James, is like when I would try to do the right thing as a kid, sometimes it's not so easy, right? Sometimes there are bullies, or it's seen as being weak, or other people cheat. So what are your thoughts on maybe the difficulties parents and students have to navigate when they're trying to do the right thing, but maybe there's just a lot of negativity or bad apples in the group?
I think you look at it as an opportunity when you adopt the philosophy that turn your struggle into your strength. Whatever you're going through now that might be difficult, there's an opportunity there to come out on the other side much stronger than you ever could have been. So when you look at it through that lens, and looking back in my life, I can see how the struggles I went through helped to sharpen me on the other side. And I tell students I work with this now that had very difficult upbringings, you went through that, but that struggle is your greatest strength because you now understand on a personal level how to overcome that, what it's like to go through that. So there's tremendous value in going through these things, and it's just a matter of communicating that philosophy. And of course, if you're going to communicate it to a young person but you're not modeling it, or you don't set that example, or they hear you complain and fuss about your struggles, it's never going to stick, because then they're thinking this hypocrite is preaching to me again. But if you are doing it and you are communicating it and you're paying attention, so you're able to maybe relate some of what you're teaching to some everyday situations that you've picked up on, then it's effective. So I think definitely taking on that philosophy and that view that your struggle is your strength, the opportunity is the way, so
Your
that's
struggle
what
is
I.
yeah. So your struggle is your strength, and then that gives you the empathy to know how to act better. And when you see that situation again, you know what to say or what to do to help someone out. And so as an educator, you've dealt with the students and you dealt with parents. And there's so many ways to go wrong with parenting, right? You hear about helicopter parents, or sometimes if a kid gets a bad grade or gets in trouble at school, then you have the angry parent kind of yelling at the teacher instead of the focus being where it should be, or just reacting in a bad way. And so I'm sure with all your years, you've dealt with some parents of all kinds. So do you have anything like any kind of message to tell the parents, or anything just to relate to us about this whole how parents should act, especially when dealing with their kid's teacher or their kid's education?
I would say one key piece of advice or one key insight is when you see 99% of people going one way, the best way is likely the way of the 1%. So where you see all or almost all other parents, or 99%, competing, they want pictures for their children to be on Facebook that showcase the trophy, or showcase that it's a competition, right? They're comparing, they're competing, and this is natural. But if you're into that mindset and you're playing that game, you're you're walking down the path to destruction, really, based on what we're talking about. That's a path that doesn't end well. But the way of the 1% would be to withdraw from that comparing and competing, even if it requires you getting off social media so you're not forced to see it every day, and you withdraw from that and you humble yourselves, because that's where it has to start. It's unfortunate that the systems that we have on our smartphone and those apps, those are systematically leading us down the wrong path. Not all of them, but certainly the comparing, the competing, the criticizing that we see every day on a lot of these things. It's really a dangerous place to be. There's a documentary called The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've seen it or you know anybody who has, but it's the founders of Google, a lot of the lead engineers of Facebook in the early days. And these guys all got together and they said, we created this stuff and we know it's leading humanity to the wrong outcome. And so these guys who have a more fundamental, intimate knowledge of the technology and how it's built and how notifications work and how, they're using the dopamine hit and the intermittent rewards, all this psychology against us. So it is a very, very insightful documentary, and it really paints a picture that I think everybody needs to see. So I would say my advice would be to watch that and think about withdrawing from that arena where there's the emotional cancers of criticizing, competing, comparing, complaining. So get out of that arena quick.
It's destructive, isn't it? And it leads to all these unhealthy behaviors, and you are trying to keep up with what they put up as their best effort. Like you look at someone's social media profile and you think they're doing great, and it's like they curated that. They really made an effort to show their absolute best, and you think you're looking at just like some everyday average kind of posting they're doing, but they're really working at that. And here you are thinking you're behind by comparing yourself to that, and then you try to keep up with the Joneses, and you're doing all this extra work just to impress people you don't even like, and it seems silly looking at it from that. And like, yeah, you're so right that the social media and the screens and the technology, they know how it can be used well or it can be misused. Like I think I heard like Bill Gates didn't and Steve Jobs didn't let their kids use like tablets or social media till they were like age 14, 15, like way later than is the norm. And so they can definitely be misused. So it's good to dial back or not use that if it's leading you down the wrong path. And what I'm also getting from you is that there's good competition and bad competition, right? There's competing with yourself and bettering your best. There's competing in like a team sport and kind of bringing everything. But then there's kind of the nasty, just nonstop competition. And so it's good to just know what's helping us or what's not helping us. And you're mentioning this idea also about getting on a path. And I want to make sure that we maybe talk about this a little bit because kids are never the same, right? They grow up, they end up, they get through high school, they become adults, and there's something to think about as far as when these parents are raising their kids in a certain way. Well, these kids will eventually become adults, and then they will need to survive in the world, but they also kind of might then butt heads with the parent because now they're kind of on their own path. And if you did not apply good parenting, or if your kid hates you, then they might grow up to be someone that ends up hating you. And so, can you maybe speak to that a little bit? Like, tell us what happens or how we can avoid raising someone that doesn't speak to us in the future. Sounds really bad.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I imagine there's a lot of different angles to take to get you a really good answer. But I think not being hypocritical, I think children resent that when they feel like somebody's just preaching to them and telling them the textbook, parental instructions, rather than really making an effort to set an example, making a conscious effort to become better yourself as you're trying to tell a child to become better. There's just nothing as effective as modeling. Whether it's bad or good, it has a tremendous effect. And of course, making time, there's no, and again, I want to circle back to the social media, because even people who are using it, who aren't comparing and competing and posting these pictures, let's say you spend an hour a day on it and you're just viewing and checking things out. What if that hour a day were invested in planning some intentional communication with your child, or maybe measuring and tracking growth in some of the character areas, character development? There's already not enough hours in the day. And if we took that 1 hour that was dedicated to maybe entertainment and we applied it to something to build the relationship and something to show that we're investing our time into them, they'll see that. And I think that relationship is what carries on. And that relationship is what continues to keep them wanting to reciprocate down the road. So I think it's dangerous to neglect giving your child that attention, and that could lead one day to them reciprocating that and not wanting to give you attention. So certainly our time and what we invest now comes back around in the future, I believe.
And I believe that as well. And I agree with you that time is finite and that it can be all too easy to fall into just some, maybe, I mean, some bad habits, but some just kind of lame and mediocre habits, right? Of just watching TV or scrolling on the phone and not focusing on what's important, which is giving some attention to your child. Like I saw or I heard of some statistic the other day, James, where they said, the first 18 years of your kid's life, you more or less, other than school, you spend like a lot of time with them. And then after age 18, you only spend 1 year. Like if you looked at age 18 and above and all those years, if you totaled up all that time, once they're out of the nest, you really only spend 1 year of time at when they're an adult, because they have their own life, their own career, they're off doing something else. So that just really tells me that we need to make the most of the time that we have, and we can't get the time back, and we owe it to ourselves to work on these problems and to be happy and make sure that everyone is happy, and just that we maybe solve some of these little problems so that way we can all get along as a family unit. And so if a parent out there says, okay, well, you're saying a lot of the right things, and I'm having some of this self-awareness about some of these actions I can take, but I wish there was some kind of way to do this on an ongoing basis. Can you tell us about the gapapp.com and what you have for these curious parents who want to do better, and what's the offer at this website?
Well, it starts by joining the email list, and I'm developing these modules to where a parent can engage and participate in some key activities that don't take a lot of time, but basically set the table for the development of your goals and the different things that you want to accomplish as a parent and as a professional. And we're going to take that same model that doesn't take much time, let's say 15 minutes a week. 15 minutes a week, if you invest that as a parent in these activities, you're setting the foundation for onboarding your child into a similar system. And now that you've participated and you understand the system on an intimate level, you're able to, number one, create kind of a team partnership with your child and understand the challenges that they're trying to overcome as far as utilizing the system. So that would be where to start. Jump on the email list and you'll get updates as these different modules become available.
Amazing and awesome. So you're part of a team partnership with your child, and the way to jump in and get on the list and find out about some of these activities is at thegapapp.com. That's thegapapp.com. And to give us a little bit of a taste here, James, is there like an easily explainable, like an example of one of these 15-minute activities that a parent can do with their kid that they'll find out at thegapapp.com?
Yeah, so one very powerful thing is really accountability relationships, right? If you have your list of top 5 goals or top 3, Robert, and I have mine, and we underneath those goals we have milestones and we have our to-do list. Well, we're talking today's Friday, and we could turn around in 1 week and we could meet and I could say, how'd it go, Robert? And you'll tell me, what adjustments are you going to make this week? And I'll do the same and we'll share. And just that one activity, really, I like to say it sets your GPS. By reciting your goals and talking about your goals on a weekly basis, you're now more likely to pick up different ideas and different opportunities throughout the week. So you're kind of setting that compass or that GPS in the right direction. You're having to share with somebody else so you know that there's some accountability. And so there's a few really powerful benefits there. And then you're engaging in something very positive with your family. So I think there's 3 really powerful things that work there. And I think from that, there's a lot of potential to add other activities that are a select few, but very powerful also.
Yes, there's quite an upside to this, and it's such a simple idea, but so few people and so few families do it. Just this idea of, we've been mentioning setting a good example, having goals, and then having this accountability to revisit those goals. And so many things can be accomplished from just setting up this simple habit that can then pay off later in life and a career and your kids' family, and just setting up the next generation for success. And so this is wonderful to think about. James Finlen from thegapapp.com. And right before we sign off here, James, do you have any just final kind of quick soundbite final words of encouragement? What comes to mind?
The Surgeon General put out a report in 2023 that said we're facing an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. If we don't fix it, this country will continue to splinter and divide until we can't stand as a nation. So those are pretty powerful words from the Surgeon General. And the family unit is fundamental to that issue and that epidemic. So, we can't control every other family, but we can control ours. And those are the consequences at the end of the day. Mental health, loneliness, isolation, these things are real. So taking these measures to overcome those very bad potential consequences with good. So we're putting some good into action and thereby counteracting the bad that is out there waiting for a lot of people, unfortunately.
But you as a family can be different. You can be the 1%. And the first step to doing that is going to thegapapp.com. And thank you very much, James, for stopping by and for sharing all of this wisdom and ideas and advice. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you.